Welcome to Leveraging Leadership, where we unpack the art of business leadership. I'm your host, Emily Sander, Chief of Staff turned Executive Leadership Coach. In this series, we dive into the role of Chief of Staff, exploring how it can be a game changer and pivotal player on your leadership team. You'll get a backstage pass and learn about the different aspects of the role and what it takes to excel in it. We'll hear from some incredible guests who have firsthand experience serving as Chief of Staff or collaborating with one on their team. And don't forget, the Chief of Staff isn't just a title or person, it represents a leadership philosophy. Leveraging Leadership is all about finding your points of greatest influence and leveraging them to better serve those around you. Dr. Gary Simonds, you're back. Welcome back.
Yeah, thanks so very much for having me. Sometimes recurrent illnesses are not that well received, but here I am.
Far from an illness, but the head of neurosurgery, Dr. Gary Simonds, is back. And for those of you who haven't heard his first episode, you can check out episode 26. And he and I talk about burnout and how to prevent burnout. And I remember my favorite part of that conversation was thinking of it like an ATM machine or a bank where you can make deposits and then you can make withdrawals. And so a lot of people make withdrawals, and then they end up burnt out, and you have to add something and make sure you're getting your deposits throughout the day. So that was my takeaway from our first conversation. But you were kind enough after that one to send me your book, Death's Pale Flag, by Dr. Gary Simonds. And so I read that book, and it was really well written. So congratulations on being a prolific writer and also a very skilled neurosurgeon, because those are two different skill sets. But I really enjoyed your book, and it certainly talks about burnout and spotting burnout, which I think is our topic for today. So how to spot burnout in others, how to approach them and have that conversation with them, how to help them when they might not see there's a problem, all of those good things. So first of all, can you just give folks a quick snapshot of what the book is about? So when we talk about it, they have a context and a backdrop.
Oh, well, the book, thank you very much for allowing me to talk about it. But the book itself is about, of all things, a brain surgeon who is clearly burned out, overworked, probably a workaholic, and burned out. But he begins seeing things that aren't there. He originally thinks they're hallucinations and then talks himself into believing that they're ghosts. And things begin to deteriorate in his job and his marriage from that point on. And we follow along for the ride.
Yes. And I think you do a really nice job of, it starts as just, I'm a high performing, high achiever, top performer in my field. And then, these things come up and there's special projects and you have to do this one or you have to work this one, only you can do it. And then it just starts to cycle out of control. And you can definitely tell by the end, oh my gosh, like it's a disaster and he can't see it, and then he can. But I thought that was very realistic and from my own experience, how that shows up. So yes, Ryan has a distinct story arc, and it goes into some dark places at times. But part of it was he didn't know that he was being sucked into the vortex. And there was also a point where you couldn't see his work performance diminishing. So he was still doing good at his surgeries. And so I'm wondering, if someone's at that point, how do you, if you're a colleague and you're watching people, how do you spot this in others?
Yeah, I think, you're making some great points. What we saw a lot of in others and in ourselves was that you don't necessarily recognize that you are burning out, partially because it's not a light switch. We did that metaphor of a bank that you're making deposits and withdrawals. And maybe a lot of us are kind of right on the edge there, and sometimes dipping into being overdrafted, and other times we're doing okay, and then we may slowly slip further and further and further into being overdrawn. And so it's not like one day you see yourself and you go, oh, the world's just turned black and I can't function anymore. It's a slow, potentially a slow process of sometimes it doing better, sometimes it doing worse, but gradually potentially slipping. And therefore really a hard time recognizing it in oneself. And we don't like recognizing things in ourselves anyway. And then on top of that, what we certainly noticed, for example, in our high performance field, was that the last thing to go was the high performance in your work. You're going to what little energy you have left in those banks, all of a sudden you're throwing at your profession so that it doesn't slip. And what that means is you've used it all up for everything else.
Yeah, and I mean, Ryan thought of the operating room, the OR, as his sanctuary almost, because in other places he wasn't in control. In other places he wasn't doing well, such as his family and friends for a time. But in that OR, he was the main guy, and
Right.
that's where he shined and excelled. And so that was kind of it drew him back over and over again. It seemed like in the book.
Yeah, exactly. And again, I was hopefully basing this on reality, maybe not the ghosts, but the rest, and in how we sometimes seek that refuge, and maybe deep down inside we know that we're slipping. So we're going to prove ourselves one way or the other. So I'm going to continue to be as good as I am or can be at my work, at my profession, at my calling. But everything else starts to drift. And I think again, I go back to that metaphor that when we are overdrawn and we have very little energy left, what happens is what we normally use that energy for is gone, and other things in our lives begin to fray, begin to slip up. So, just something, easy. We all in our interactions with other human beings, we're always using a certain amount of energy to make sure we're gentle and kind and
Sure.
respectful and polite, even when we don't particularly like that other person. And I think, a typical early sign might be we start letting our ids loose a little in those situations where we make a snappy comment, we become denigrating a little bit, maybe directly or indirectly about somebody. So I know me personally, one of my idiosyncrasies is I'm really sarcastic. And it's a much nastier sarcasm in here than comes out of my lips. But if I'm overdrawn, that sarcasm, gets an edge to it. And I've hurt people. I've seen, myself hurt people just by sarcasm.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think I definitely resonate with you put all of your eggs in the career basket, so to speak, and the other baskets go down. They go to crap. And so then you want to prove, okay, I need to prove it's worth it. So I have to double down over here. And that starts a very slippery slope. And yeah, I've experienced that myself, and I've certainly seen it in others. So it's almost a matter of, can you pull yourself out of that? Or do you need someone to say, hey, you're starting to become, there's no balance overall in your world here.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what we've been trying to work on, Emily, for quite a few years now, and we put out a bunch of books in for the healthcare sphere, simply because that's where we were, and saw it a lot in healthcare. And so, on one level, I'm hoping that through just getting the word out, more people can recognize it within themselves and not need
Yeah.
external forces to say to you, hey, what's going on there? In the worst case scenarios, what happens is some of the behaviors can become offensive enough that, next thing you know, you'll be down in human resources
Yeah.
uh, because you're just not acting in a civil way. And yet, again, we go back to that your performance. I've had that discussion myself where I'm like, tell me that my operations in
Yeah.
any way have deteriorated. Can you tell me? Can you tell me? And I'm already hostile, but I'm using that central focus as my proof that everything I'm doing is fine right now.
Well, I think maybe one of the tells then is your performance is still high, but you're not yourself because you mentioned you were
Yes.
sarcastic, and I certainly am very short, and I get very quick and like just do this thing when I'm overdrawn, and so maybe it's like, you're still doing the work, but you're just off. You're just not yourself.
It's a great point, Emily. One of our exercises that we do with people that we try to do is say, imagine that there's a film crew kind of surreptitiously filming you during the day. Just sit and think about that. Or, you're observing yourself through one of those one-way mirrors. But what do you actually look like? Are you that person who's inspiring others? You leave a wake of joy and inspiration behind you, or is everybody starting to, veer away from you? And are you being snappy and judgmental and denigrating and that sort of thing? And that seemed to be a harder exercise, at least for our teams, than I might think. So we did another thing that I think was really interesting, but boy, you got to have a lot of trust. In our group, we printed out these pages with just a lot of adjectives, descriptors of personalities. Some really good, some less so. And we handed it out to everybody on our team. We handed a whole pile of them with each other's names on all of them, and anonymously, we just asked each one of us to circle the adjectives that described the other people in the
Okay.
group.
Interesting.
And then eventually you got the papers and with how people were describing you. And it was shocking. I mean, it was shocking for everybody. Now, we didn't make you reveal it. In these exercises, what we do is have you talk about your response to it. How does it make you feel? What's it make you think? That sort of thing. But I had all these adjectives about me, which I would have never thought. Right? What was the one that really bothered me? And it wasn't supposed to bother me, but it did. Bothered me because I wasn't. Inconsistent. They said inconsistent, and I'm like, knock on it. I'm the most consistent person on earth. And they said, well, then not lately, there, Dr. Simmons. So it was very revealing because I don't think we see a lot of this in ourselves. So an exercise like that, you got to have a very trusting group to do it and not get everybody upset. But that I imagining somebody filming you, if you can put yourself in that, sometimes you can picture how you're behaving, around others.
And we all have our best intentions in our head. And sometimes we even say, hey, I'm about team and integrity and treating people with respect. Yet I just yelled at this like, oh my gosh, that goes against everything that I'm supposed to stand for. So it is how you're showing up. Because, people on your teams I found are not mind readers. They can't read your mind. So they go based on what you do. Funny that.
Yeah, that's another interesting sidelight here, Emily. That idea that nobody's a mind reader, but I would argue that we all believe we are. And this is, I think, again, this is a place where when we're low on energy, we just default to. So
Yes.
you and I have an interaction at work, and it's a stressful interaction for some reason. Something didn't get accomplished or whatever it is, and I immediately tell myself a story in my head. Oh, she's really trying to get at me. She wants my job. Or, she's lazy, or she doesn't care. Or how did Stanford graduate somebody like her, or something like that. And so we make up this story. It's usually not very nice. It's not, the story isn't, oh man, she was really doing her best. She did everything she could to get that accomplished. I bet you she sweat blood over it. No, it's often very nasty. By the way, we do this in our relationships, in our marriages, in our significant others all the time. I was just telling somebody the other day that for my entire marriage, 43 years, I cannot load the dishwasher right. If I load it, my wife comes behind me and reloads it herself. And forever I tell myself stories. Oh, she's mad at me. Oh, she's, I didn't pick up the clothes. I didn't fold the laundry. I didn't do this. She's just pissed off at me. We make these stories, and I think particularly when we're low on energy, they get nastier, they get sharper. And then the funniest thing about it's not funny, it's sad, but the funniest thing about it is we react to the story. We don't even react to the situation or the behavior or whatever we originally are telling ourselves the story about. We react to the story and start getting mad at something that me totally off. And we are not mind readers, so most of the time we're wrong.
And I think, we can sit there and fume over something. Like we can get on that hamster wheel and there's no one else in the room. There's no other external data points, but it's like, oh, and when he said this, and then if he says this in this upcoming meeting, I'm going to say this, and then he's going to say this, and then I'm going to say this. It's a killer retort. And I've had those kind of screenplay exercises going on in my head, like, oh, here we go. I know what's about to happen. So that's interesting. And I know that you had I read your Psychology Today article on, hey, we're making up stories all the time. And I think that's a really good read for people. I'll drop the link in the show notes because we all do this to a certain extent. And even just being aware of, hey, I am projecting quite a lot here. And maybe I need to go in and fact find, or maybe I need to go in and collect some data points here to form my story. So go in with a blank slate and at least confirm your theory, if not go in completely neutral, which can be hard. One other thing that doctors have to deal with is tough conversations. And I want to talk about this in a couple different ways. Part of burnout for a doctor is you're doing this highly advanced medical procedures, which have very serious ramifications. And then in addition to that, you are also informing family members of this. So just, we'll go into how to have that conversation and maybe how to break good news and break bad news to people. But just in a general sense, what kind of toll does that take on a doctor? Or what kind of toll did it take on you in terms of withdrawals and burnout and having those conversations with families?
Yeah, I mean, seeing I've never burned out and I've always been perfect, I can't really say that it was a problem for me, but I see it elsewhere. No, I talk about this a lot, particularly with neurosurgeons, but obviously we're not the only specialty that gets into the really heavy stuff. But I mean, I could be on call at night and maybe talk to 5, 6 separate families, more sometimes. I mean, we usually saw anywhere from 20 to 30 emergency consults at night. So you could be telling horror stories to one family after another after another. Somebody's in coma, somebody's dead, somebody's paralyzed. You're telling somebody they have a brain tumor. They're telling them that their child has a brain tumor. It just goes on and on and on. And I felt like this had to take its toll. It had to take its toll. And interestingly, a couple vignettes about it. I would have to say that throughout my career, I didn't feel it that much there at work. And there is a component of it where you got to shut it off because, I got to move on to the next patient, the next family, the next operation. So I think part of it is you're walling it off. You're walling it off. And it's interesting because there were very few times where I just felt the sheer weight of it. But the day I stopped operating, I have become so kind of emotional, so much easier for emotions to come to the surface. and I joke about it, but I'll watch an emotional cat food commercial and I'll feel tears running down my face, and I'm like, "What is this? What? How can I be?" And I think it's showing its hand. There's nobody who can go through that and not have it, you know, impact them. It's just a question of how much have you walled yourself off from from that impact, I think. But there was an interesting twist that gets to, your subject. We were talking about this one day in our group, and I wanted to bring it up to the team, which I did frequently, this breaking of bad news, because it had to be stressful. And I wanted to see how the rest of the team was responding. And I was saying, this must be taking a toll on us. And everybody was kind of nodding. And then one guy kind of bravely raised his hand and he said, this may be weird to say, guys, but I got to tell you, sometimes when I give bad news, I get that weird tingling feeling in my body that usually comes with something that I feel like that make feels good, that I'm getting something positive out of this, and I can't. It makes me feel guilty. I don't even know what I'm thinking. And then everybody in the group started nodding and saying, "Yeah,
Hmm.
I kind of get that feeling sometimes too." And what we decided, and I think it's very valid. He went on to say, I began to think really what this is about is I think I break bad news well. I think I'm good at it. I think I'm empathetic with the families. I think I teach them. I bring them in. They understand. They understand the nuances as best as possible. They know we're doing everything we can. And he said, when it boils down to it, isn't that what being a doctor is about? Being a doctor isn't necessarily always curing disease, but it's addressing human suffering. And that family is just as much our patients as the patient is, and we are addressing their suffering. Yeah, we're not fixing things, but at least we're clarifying. We're giving somebody they can trust, somebody who's going to give them the straight scoop. So I thought it was very insightful, and I think he's right.
That was brave of that individual. And I mean, if you're breaking news, especially bad news, paralyzed or their life is going to be different from now on, you better believe that that family is going to remember every word you say forever. So
Forever.
that's the conversation that is part of the job. How do you? I mean, do you train people to have those types of conversations, or how do you break bad news well?
Yeah, what a great point, Emily. One of the first things that we advise is you don't go into it cold. You don't just, see the patient and then ramble out into a
Waiting room.
waiting room and just start blurting. So one of the things that we recommend is to go somewhere, just into a closet if you need to, and think just for a minute or two, how am I going to lay this out? How am I going to lay it out in an effective yet empathetic way so they understand it as well as possible and they know we're here, we're doing what we can and all that. So I think that's really important is, not to just plunge into it, but also we practiced it all the time. So we did role playing on all sorts of patient conversations, and we would do it in front of the whole team for critique. We would do it with videoing at times, so you can watch yourself do it. Interestingly enough, our PAs, physician assistants, made wonderful mock patients. I think they're just far more in tune with the patients than we knuckleheads were. But they made great mock patients, and they would lay it on us on all sorts of different scenarios because it wasn't just breaking bad news. Sometimes it was talking about an operation. Sometimes it was drug seeking behavior because we dealt with a lot of opioid seeking and stuff. And how do you handle that? How do you handle an angry doctor yelling at you and that sort of thing? So I think the role playing, when I would review this with the team, at first they were pretty cynical and, no, I'm not going to play act. And after a while, I think everybody agreed that it was one of the more valuable things that we would do.
Absolutely. Yeah, you have to have the technical expertise, and we certainly would like our neurosurgeons to be competent there, but also being able to communicate what's going on is almost equally as important at certain points. And I remember in the book, Ryan, the main character, he would have these conversations with families who had a whole myriad of reactions. Some cried, some yelled at him, some started praying, some, it was just a different reaction. So you never know how that news is going to hit the particular person you're talking to in that moment. So you're certainly there as conveying information, but also absorbing whatever that reaction is. And I remember in the book, first of all, he would start going numb. So one of his, I think you mentioned it, like the survival mechanism, like let me just block this off or wall this off, is he would start to go numb. So he wouldn't feel anything. And that was a protective thing. And then at least a handful of times in the book, after he had given bad news and had absorbed this emotional reaction from the family, he would go cry, which we don't think about, or at least I didn't think about a lot. Oh, yeah, after they have a conversation and they're kind of stoic and they're giving all this like clinical information and diagnosis, they might go and they might cry because they're a human too.
Yeah, I think I didn't do a lot of the crying myself. He's a much nicer person than me, the guy in the book. I think I would go home and yell at my kids. I think that was my release. No, hopefully I didn't. But yeah, no, there's no way it's not going to impact you. But I think, again, all this is translatable to every industry and everything that we do. All sorts of interactions are going to carry some charge with them. Of one degree or another. Some are super serious, maybe some are not. But we all have to interact. We all have to exchange information and plan together and all that sort of thing. And so there's a lot of skills in this, I think, that are very translatable. I think another one, and I have put another article in this on Psychology Today, but the I think one of the things that we do, particularly if we're nervous going into these conversations, is we revert to our industrial speak. So the worst thing that we could do, for example, as a physician, if we're going to talk about something serious to a patient, is break into pure medical language. We
Right.
call it medicalese, and just start saying, your diagnosis is glioblastoma, and this is a highly malignant tumor that requires cytoreduction and then chemotherapy and radiation therapy that will
It's a
uh,
supraventricular tachyarrhythmia.
yeah,
Oh
and,
no.
and and so here we are spewing this stuff, none of which makes any sense, and lose them immediately. And I can see that happening in any industry, unless you are talking with somebody who is right there with you. You got to kind of simplify and translate and make it digestible and understandable, or else you immediately shut them off and alienate them, and lose the string.
So you talk about burnout, preventing burnout in yourself and others. So let's say you're at work, whether that's a doctor's office or a boardroom, and you notice that one of your colleagues is not quite themselves. Like they're doing a good job, but they are definitely burning the candle at both ends, and you can tell they're starting to go in a bad death spiral. So what types of things do you say? What types of things do you do in that situation?
Yeah, and there's a challenge, right? I think, I think in situations like that, you obviously want to step carefully. Depends on the work relationships and all that. I think you have to try to be objective first in your assessments. So it may be very easy to carry with you your own prejudices or your own burnout and start assuming that everybody else is in the same boat. So at some point, I think you have to give it a chance. You have to observe. You have to recognize that people are going through waves and rhythms, if you will, and not just one day decide, they're burned out. Therefore, I'm going to, call it to question and threaten them that I'm going to, human resources if they don't do something about it right away. That's probably not a good thing. So I think objective observation for a while is a good idea. I think if you have some trusted colleagues, it's always good to check off with somebody else and say, what's going on? What's going on with Emily? And maybe they know something. Maybe they know that, something's been going on rough at home or something like that. I think it is ultimately, though, if you're concerned, it's always reasonable to actually address it straight up. You don't want to couch it in terms of you're doing this and you're doing that, but it might be something to the effect of, Emily, I'm a little concerned. I don't feel like we are interacting in our normal manner. I feel like you may even throw yourself under the bus a little bit and say, I feel like we're irritating each other. And is there any way we can address it? Is there anything that I'm doing that's causing your problems? And that may open the door to getting deeper into it rather than just come out with a finger pointing saying,
Yeah.
yo, you're burnt out, and here's the number to the team psychiatrist.
Yeah.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I just say like accusing someone is not it's not a good way to broach that conversation.
Yeah, and sometimes you want to get out of non-threatening situations too, where if you just had this big heated meeting and then you just jump them right there, as opposed to maybe you're having a lunch together and it's just a softer, more gentler interaction, then it's easier to probe. So timing means stuff. I would say if you're going to have that conversation, it's one you practice a little bit just to think about. Just like breaking bad news, you always want to be ready for the unexpected. So if all of a sudden they flame out on you, you don't want to then engage and start yelling back. Let them flame out on me, and if it put it in a parking lot for now, or if it calms down, you might say, hey, that doesn't feel like you.
Yeah.
Um,
I
something
think
like that.
I think that's key. Yeah, sorry to jump in. It might be you open with an observation and say, "Hey, last meeting you were really sarcastic when Maria talked to you, and I know that you're not like that. I know that you care about the team. I know that you care about our patients or whatever." And maybe bring it back to that. Like, I know who you really are and what you really stand for, and this is different from that. So just throwing out that observation for them.
Yeah, another way too is, if you have personally um, eh, eh, felt the wrath or felt it's okay also to say, hey, we had an interaction the other day, and I came out of that feeling miserable. Um, and I thought, was there any other way I can handle it? And then I thought, but that's not how you usually handle it. And I'm wondering, did I do something, or is something going on for you?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that just starts a conversation. I think that what you just said is a conversation starter or opener, whereas the finger wagging and accusatory nature is like that's where it shuts down. It's like, okay, shields up, full steam ahead type of thing. So we're at DEFCON 1. So I think that's something good to keep in mind. And I'm trying to recap for the listener. So to spot burnout in others, we're looking at certainly performance. So if their work just starts to slip and it's like, they are always hit deadlines or their quality of work is always high and it's consistently starting to slip over time. If they're not showing up as themselves, those are two tells. Are there any others that people should be aware of?
Yeah, I mean, I even compiled a little list for you of examples, and I think it all goes back to I still like that metaphor. Just imagine what might start happening if you yourself are energy depleted, and what kind of things might start popping up. So I don't know. I can give you some off my list. Just and there's simple things, but let's say you have somebody who's who's gregarious normally and is out there, patting people on the back and giving them compliments, and then that all just seems to drift away, and they're kind of, schlepping their way
Subdued.
through
Yeah.
things. Somebody who is becoming easily irritable particularly over trivial things. We're all allowed sometimes to, just feel the weight of it all. But when the trivial things start, showing effect on people, I think that's an early sign. We see this a lot in medicine, and I think this is a real indicator, is if they start denigrating other people behind their backs. And we love this in medicine, by the way. Nobody's as good as us, right? So the damn ER docs, the damn internists, these guys, those guys, I don't even know how they got through medical school. And that's just, they're your teammates. You're in a sacred quest together, and
Yeah.
you're calling, all your comrades terrible. If yeah, I'll just give you just a bunch of others that are kind of in our grouping. Just sleep disturbances. You'll often hear people complaining of sleep, and they're not getting the right sleep, and they're having more nightmares. People dreaming about work in nightmare form. I still have a nightmare, by the way, that keeps coming.
Oh
a head
boy.
open. There's a head open on the operating table, and it's bleeding, and I'm asking for an instrument, and they won't give me the instrument, and I'm yelling at everybody. So yeah, they can have an impact on you. And if you know the people well enough, things like that just the things that bring them outside interest. They normally talk about playing golf or reading or playing their guitar or banjo over the weekend, and they happen to mention that they're not doing any of that, or they're not talking about it anymore. So diminishing of just the stuff that brings pleasure in their life. Same sort of thing if you know that, once the people are getting home, this all applies for ourselves. So you can just put this
Sure.
lens on ourselves. But you get home, and instead of doing the things that bring you pleasure and meaning and stuff like that, you just collapse on the couch and sit there with the TV flicker. That sort of thing. Cutting back on contact with friends, cutting back on contact with family. That's a decent sign that things, aren't right. Another one, this is kind of an interesting one, I think, but beginning to identify the workspaces, the normal, and everything outside of it being the abnormal. What do I mean by that? That the only thing that has meaning, the only thing that matters, the only thing that makes any sense is this work sphere. And when you get out of the work sphere, you start feeling uncomfortable because everybody's not behaving the way they do at work, and people may be having fun and laughing, and they're not taking things too seriously. I don't know. We saw this a bunch in medicine, but I could see this happening elsewhere. Um, we have another one that we call the self-denial overindulgence cycle,
Okay.
where you work like a dog, you work like a dog, you work like a dog, and then you get a break and you go wild.
Oh, okay.
You
Yeah.
gamble, you drink heavily, you go to the wrong places in town. We see substance abuse, for example. And we justify it. We go, I earned this.
I deserve that. Yeah.
I deserve it. And it's more common than we would like. Um, Other things, again, that work versus home life, that we start to trivialize everything that's not work, trivialize everything and everybody around us that's not with that goal that you're
Yeah.
shooting at work. Again, it was easy in my world. My sons might say, hey, they look glum one day, and I say, hey, what's the matter? And they say, oh, my girlfriend broke up with me. And I would reflexively say, well, at least you're not in coma up in the ICU like a couple of
Oh,
teenagers I know. And so what we've done is just trivialized everything that's not our work. Um, Again, we talked about how easy it is to become irritable, but losing it. I think here's another quickie for you, but another good one is look at someone's behavior between when they're face to face and when they're on the phone. Because
Interesting.
sometimes, yeah, sometimes they'll hold it together when they're face to face. And then when they get on the phone, they start getting more snappy or sarcastic. It's like they removed, and probably email and text goes the same way. You remove yourself from
Person, yeah.
actually, yeah.
Yeah.
And then the id, again, think of that id just starting to be released because you don't have the energy to hold it down.
Yeah.
I don't know. Those would be kind of simple ones that I might think of that would be indicators that somebody or you are starting on a journey of burnout. There's a kind of a gender differential. Also, it seems that men often do react more angrily. So when they're burning out, this anger bubbles to the surface, and therefore you get the
Layers.
denigration.
Yeah.
Yeah, you get the denigration, you get the snapping, you get the snarky remarks, which and none of this is absolute. But we all on the woman's side of the equation, we tend to see more guilt of just free floating anxious guilt.
Yeah.
And part of it, I think, is because the men are such jerks that we've set up a situation where women are doing everything and they can't do everything. And so now you feel guilty if you're not being, doing your home duties as much as possible, your work duties or this duty or that duty. But anyway, if you're feeling a lot of guilt all over the place, that may be a sign too.
Yeah. No, those are great tips. So I think if, folks, if you're listening, I rewind and listen to those again because those are so good for yourself, ourselves, and for other people. And I think the common theme, as you said, is that id coming out where, okay, if it's all about me, then I'm going to trivialize my son's comment. If it's all about me, then I deserve to go to Vegas. And what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. If it's all about me, then I can be mean to this person because they're clearly incompetent. So that's a through line
Exactly.
all the way. That's really interesting. Yeah. And I mean, I know I felt that for sure, where it's like, all right, everyone in this room is clearly stupid and I have the right answer. So let's just do what I say. And that makes everything better. But so those are the signs for it. And then we also talk through, just to recap, the what you do, which is kind of prep yourself for a conversation and make sure you're not going in guns blazing, or you're not going in where you're distracted, and you have a little bit of a game plan. And maybe that starts with an open-ended question or an observation, and reinforcing the things that they are good at or that they do stand for in a positive way, and make an observation that something seems off from that. Is that what I'm hearing?
No, I like that's better summary than I'll ever come up with. So that's great. And I think it's very disarming if you can share your own foibles to one degree or
Yes.
another as well. Say, I know this project we've been working on is, really getting to me. And I found myself snapping at half the team all the time. And I have to say that the other day when you went off on me, that didn't feel so good either. I wonder if you're feeling the same pressure. But that way,
I like that. Yeah.
you're disarming to a certain degree.
Yeah. It's like I'm not perfect. I notice these things in myself too. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And I'll share a quick story. So early in my career, I was definitely burnt out. And it was the first time that I'd ever managed people. So I had my first team and I was given a chance to build a client management department from scratch. So the company had never had one, and it was an international client management department. And I had never, like at that time, I had never interviewed anyone. I was like, you want me to do a resume review? What? And so I was standing up this team and I was very, very stressed out, but I wanted to prove myself. And I did everything we said. Like I shut off my friends and family and I just focused on this. And I always remember my one coworker, she put a meeting on my calendar because that was the only way to get a hold of me. And when I walked in there, she turned her computer around and she just showed me a video on YouTube of a zoom out from the city to the country to the world to the universe to the galaxies to all of those different things. And I was like, this is a weird meeting, but it made me calm down. and get perspective. And then at the end of that video, she said, "Hey, Emily, I want you to know that when you're showing up at these meetings, you're showing up very stressed and very serious." And then she just stopped talking. And she was like, "As a friend, I want you to know that." And that was the meeting. And I was like, holy cow. So part of me was like, oh, like, how dare you call me out on this truth? But part of me was, no, I really appreciate the fact that she said something. And she said, "As a friend, I want you to know this," because she was someone who we were on good terms and friendly with. So that was just that's another example of how you might do that from my own life.
Yeah, no, it's great. And certainly uh the the um situation is a little different if you are close with somebody. And what we tried to do, and I mean, it really speaks to just it's always better if your workspace is filled with people who have mutual respect. You don't have to love each other, but at least mutual respect and friendship on its some level where you have each other's back. Well, it's a heck of a lot easier than to say, "Hey, I just got to tell you something." But again, that was a perfect way. They didn't do it in front of everybody. They didn't do it in the middle of the board. "Hey, what's wrong with you, Emily? You need to chill out, man." Pull somebody aside. Try to reach some level of calmness. Don't barrage. Don't come in with guns blazing and list 15 problems that they're having.
To start Tommy gunning them with improvements they need to
Exactly.
make. Yeah, no, not a good tactic. Yeah. And then the other thing, the other one I would avoid is a classic when you tell someone to relax, just relax with a sense of urgency. I'm like, that does not work either. So I've been on the receiving and I've been on the giving end of that, which is not helpful.
And
But
particularly if they do it in kind of a smarmy way, with, "Man, you just need to chill out a little, man."
just relax. Yeah. You can be the sea turtles in Finding Nemo and be super calm. Just relax. Well, Garrett, you've shared some really key insights for folks. So I think people have a plethora of things they can look for in others and in themselves to look for burnout. And then they have the next steps to engage with that person, or, if you're super self-aware, engage with yourself on some of these things that are showing up. So thank you for that. I will definitely have links to your books and links to your Psychology Today articles, which are very, very good. And you've shared a lot of value with people. So I always enjoy our conversation. So thank you again for being on the show.
Oh my gosh, it is my pleasure. And you're so good at this, Emily. It makes me look somewhat good. So that's great.
You're doing pretty good on your own, so I appreciate it. But thank you again, and hopefully this will be the second of many conversations. So, Dr. Gary, thank you so much.
Thank you.
If you'd like some more information on the topic discussed in this episode, head over to nextlevel.coach and click on the resources page for some helpful free downloads.